Rose, a tiny dancer. Walk with me down nostalgia lane. Hello, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and welcome to Nostalgia Lane, the monthly series of videos in which apparently I need to sing in the intro every month, or at least the last 3 months. I don't know why, I just have to sing. Anyways, what Nostalgia Lane actually is a monthly series of videos in which I rewatch and review a film from my past, something that I adored, that I loved at a prior point in my life and haven't seen in a while, and wanted to rewatch and see what I think of it. Now, this month's Nostalgia Lane film is Almost Famous, starring Kate Hudson, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Frances McDormand, Jason Lee, Billy Crudup. Almost Famous from the year 2000. If anyone is wondering where I'm getting that from, it was a Conan O'Brien bit from the 90s. And actually, he continued doing it beyond the year 2000, which was silly. Anyways, that's where that's from. Let's get into a Nostalgia Lane. If you've seen it before, you know how it goes. Part 1, I'll talk about why I chose the film. Part 2, I will talk about what I thought of the film when I first saw it. Part 3, I will talk about how I viewed it now after my rewatch. And then Part 4, I will give my rating out of 10 after my recent rewatch of the film. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with Part 1. Okay, so Part 1, why I chose this film for Nostalgia Lane. So I talked about at the end of last month's Nostalgia Lane how all of my Nostalgia Lane reviews up to that point had been from the 80s. Well, except for one. I did have one from 1990, but that's pretty much the 80s. I mean, come on. And the reason why is because my original conception of this monthly series was that, I'll pick something from my childhood. So picking something from my childhood means I'm watching a lot of freaking 80s movies, and I'm over it. I'm kind of done with the 80s movies, especially after last month and Gremlins. The movie is so terrible. I was just like, I am over the 80s movies. And you know what? I'm old enough now that I can watch something outside of the 80s. I can watch something from the 90s and early 2000s. From when I personally was in my 20s, not in my childhood anymore. That still happened 20 years ago. This movie came out 22 years ago. God, I am getting old. So I decided for the next 3 months at least, I'm going to do movies in the 90s and forward. In fact, the next 3 that I have planned, 2 out of the 3 will be from the year 2000 or forward. So that's what I really wanted to do, and I picked Almost Famous in particular because I was on a Facebook group that I belong to for Fish Women, the women who love the band Fish, and it's called Fish Chicks. Anytime I say that, I think people are going to think I'm saying Fish Sticks, but Fish Chicks is the name of the group, and someone posted about how they had just went back and watched Almost Famous for the first time in a while and how much they loved it. And I was like, that is a great idea. I should definitely watch that movie because I friggin' loved it when I first saw it, which I'll talk about more in part 2. And so I want to go back and revisit that, and that'll be perfect to get me outside of the 80s. And you know what? Even though I wasn't a kid when I first saw this movie, at age 26, I was a completely different person than I am now. And I'm not just talking about the fact that I have transitioned from male to female since that time. Just in general, I've evolved, I've matured, I've grown up. I'm a completely different human being, even without the transition. So the beauty of watching a film from that era is that I remember it more, and I remember more the person who I was than I might from a film that I first saw when I was like 10 or something like that. So therefore, part 2 of this video will be longer than it has been in the past when I've been reviewing films from my childhood, because I remember a hell of a lot more about the experience of watching that film at age 26 than I would remember watching a film at age 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. So part 2 will be longer. So buckle up. Let's go ahead and move on to part 2. So as I prepared to watch this film again, I had to really think back to what the exact circumstances were of me watching this movie, because I really had this really strong memory of watching this film several times at my parents' house, down in our basement, and the big TV that I watched many a movie on from my previous Nostalgia Lane reviews many times when I was a kid. But that didn't make sense to me because I had long since moved out of my parents' house by 2000. So I started thinking about it, thinking about the timing of this movie, and then I remembered in the year 2000, I moved from Oregon cross country to Cape Cod. Spoiler alert, I have since moved back to Oregon, as I live there now. But I was moving to follow a girlfriend at the time, a partner who had a job in Cape Cod. So when I was moving, I got an apartment on Cape Cod, but it didn't open up for another couple weeks, and I'd already left Oregon. I was already on the East Coast. My parents lived and still live in Maryland. It's 8 hours south of where I was going to be living. So I was staying with my parents for 2 or 3 weeks until my apartment was ready. And that is when I watched Almost Famous. Now I remember specifically, we went to Blockbuster Video, and we rented. All these memories started flooding back to me. We went to Blockbuster Video, and I rented that film with my parents. And then the first night we had it, I think my parents went to bed early or something, and I ended up watching it by myself. And then the next day I was like, oh my God, Mom and Dad, you have to watch this movie. And then I watched it again with them. And you have 3 days to return a Blockbuster movie, so I watched it at least one more time. So I watched it at least 3 times, possibly 4 times in that 3 days. So I freaking love that movie immediately. And then later I went back up to Cape Cod, where my partner was, and then I told her, we've got to go to Blockbuster and get this movie, you'll love it. And then we watched it. I probably watched it another 2 or 3 times when we rented it from Blockbuster. And then I don't remember how I continued watching it after that. I know that wasn't the last time I ever saw it. I definitely watched it a few more times later on. I don't remember specifically the circumstances, but I definitely watched it several times. Now, why did I love this movie so much? I think what it really boils down to is it really touched something in me related to my love of music and how much it feeds my soul and how much it brings me joy. And this film was really able to touch on that, but it was able to touch on that while simultaneously balancing the portrayal of the dark side of rock and roll and rock and roll life. The whole sex and drugs and rock and roll thing. The sex with, people cheating on their wives and cheating with their friends, girlfriends, and all kinds of fucked up things like that. And then the drugs. There's a lot of drug addiction, obviously. Fucked up shit that happens there. Which this film didn't get too deep into, but, plenty of other rock and roll films have touched on that subject, so you don't need to. But it did an adequate job of portraying the dark side of rock and roll, kind of the ugliness of the rock and roll scene, I should say, and life as a band on tour, how there can be a dark side to that. It was able to portray that while simultaneously really strongly conveying just how wonderful music is and making that connection to the viewer, someone like myself who really has this love of music and how much it really touches my soul. And really tapped into that. And so it balanced both of those things. And I think that's a thing that a lot of rock and roll films have attempted, and I would say very few, if any, had really been successful. I think about some of those biopic films, like the Ray Charles one and the Johnny Cash one. I feel like they were trying to do something like that, but in the end of it is wasn't Johnny Cash kind of a dick to a lot of women? I mean, was that ever made up for? It was the same thing with Ray Charles. Wasn't he kind of a dick? I don't know that they really kind of achieve that balance. Not just those two films, but any other like rock and roll film that I can think of. I don't know that they really achieved that balance the way that this film does it. I don't know that they really were able to tap into my soul and really make me feel that connection. And the reason why I love music and the reason why I have traveled across the country to see a band called Fish or a band called The Grateful Dead or why I have gone to see a bluegrass show or a jazz performance and reach a transcendent level without drugs. That film is able to tap into that feeling for me. And that's hard to describe if you don't have that sort of love for music. It's hard to describe. If you know, you know. And this film is able to tap into that while not downplaying the ugliness of the rock and roll scene. And just telling you, you can still have that connection to music, and it's all about the music, despite the ugliness of the rock and roll scene. And it was just so perfect and beautiful, and I think that is why I was drawn to this film. And no scene stood out more in my mind than the scene from my little intro, the Tiny Dancer scene when they are all on the bus. And Tiny Dancer comes on the radio. One person starts singing, next person starts singing, and next thing you know, they're all singing together in unison. Hold me close, a tiny dancer. And the context of that is, prior to that, the band had a falling out. Jeff, played by Jason Lee, and Billy Crudup's character, Russell, had just had a huge argument. Russell then went off and went to this party and got really fucked up on LSD. And he comes back onto the bus for the first time after all of that. They don't say a word to each other. But that song coming on and them all joining together seemed very healing. And then they all remembered like what it's really all about is this love of music that they all share. And you don't need to say words. There's no words were needed. Let's just all sing together. It is so beautiful. Now, obviously, that doesn't solve the underlying problems, the root problems that they were going through. But it does allow them to kind of put aside their bullshit for a little bit so that they can get back to what it's all about, which is the music. And that scene being the launching point for that was absolutely fantastic. And I used to rewind that scene and watch it over and over again because it was so touching to me. I loved that scene so much. And it made me love that song because prior to that, Elton John songs from the 70s, it just reminded me of the classic rock stations that my parents used to listen to, or I just hear the same songs over and over again by Elton John and the Eagles and Led Zeppelin and Fleetwood Mac and all of that stuff. And I would just get so tired of those songs. In particular, Hotel California, I remember saying about 30 years ago that I never need to hear that song for the rest of my life, and I've heard it about 10 billion times since then, and I'll probably hear it 10 billion more. So those songs, that's where Tiny Dancer was kind of categorized in my brain. But then after this film, it became one of my favorite songs of all time, because every time I hear that song now, I think of that scene, and it just really fills me with glowing emotions and just really gives me chills. So now I absolutely love this song because I associate it with this particular scene, and that's really powerful. And there's actually a piece of this scene that I had completely forgotten about, but I will talk about that when I get into part 3, because now I even appreciate it even more, but I'll save that for part 3 for when I talk about after my rewatch. And another thing that really drew me into the film was the characters, the character interactions, and the acting, because without those things, whatever message they are trying to convey about the power of music is just not going to work. So the kid, the star of the film, I forget the name of the dude. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything else. He did a solid job, but we also have excellent performances by Billy Crudup and Jason Lee. And this is honestly the best performance I've seen of Jason Lee, because then he was in all those Kevin Smith movies playing the same character over and over again, and like, I don't know, this is his best performance in my opinion. And Philip Seymour Hoffman, although not in the film a whole lot, kind of in more of a supporting background role, he was awesome to see. And of course, my hat's off to Frances McDormand, who I personally think is one of the greatest actresses living today. And anything she's in, she blows me away. And the performance in this film, she's having to portray this mother who has been an overbearing, had too many rules, whatever, not allowing their kids a lot of freedom, especially with her first kid, with her daughter, and showing her evolve and having to let go of that a little bit, but still being really clingy and still having a hard time, but wanting to evolve. And the way that Frances McDormand is able to play a complex character like that is just absolutely brilliant. So there's all that, and their deep, meaningful character interactions, which I'll get into more in part 3 because I didn't remember specifically some of that stuff until I rewatched it. But I do remember that was something that really drew me to the film. And then, of course, there's also a lot of great comedy, a lot of great levity in this film. I'll talk about some of the things that I had forgotten about that cracked me up after my rewatch in part 3. But one of the things that like I always remembered was the plane scene when the plane is about to go down and they're all like confessing things and they're all kind of like really going at it and telling the truth to each other and yelling at each other. And then at the very end, the drummer, who has not spoken a word the whole movie, and I think this is his only line the whole movie, he's like, I'm gay! And then as soon as he says that, they're like, oh, look, we're safe now. Everything's okay. And the drummer's like, that was so funny to me. Now, I was worried on my rewatch, is that going to play as, I don't know, we don't make light of coming out because that is nothing to make light of it. I know it's not an easy thing to do, and especially wouldn't have been in the 1970s, and especially in that particular very hetero-focused rock and roll scene. But you know what? I noticed in my rewatch that you see him in the background hanging out later, talking to one of the band members. He doesn't really talk, doesn't have a lot of lines besides that. I don't think he had any. But there's one he's just kind of hanging out. It looks like they accept him. Like they're cool. Whatever. It's fine. So, but the way that it was portrayed and the way that he like does this, he's like squirrely and he's like, so it was just hilarious, and that really stood out to me. And I'll talk about some of the other scenes that I found really funny as well when I get to part 3. But anyway, those are all the things that I think really drew me to that film and made me just want to keep rewatching it over and over again. And then, I don't know why I stopped watching it. I hadn't seen it in a while. And I'm so happy to have rediscovered it. I may watch it again. So let me go ahead and talk about that. Let's talk about part 3, my experience of rewatching this film. Okay, so part 3, what I thought of the film after my rewatch. And so everything I just said in part 2 still stands. The characters, the actors, the connection to music, all of that still stands. But I think I actually, believe it or not, was able to gain even more appreciation for that film based on who I am today. And also just based on kind of remembering scenes that I had forgotten about that maybe didn't actually impact me as much back then, that hit me in a whole new way today. So I want to get back to that tiny dancer scene, because I had mentioned in part 2 that there is a piece of that I had forgotten, and I think it was always there. Okay, so I had the choice of watching Almost Famous or Almost Famous with a bootleg cut, and I don't know what the bootleg cut is. I'm pretty sure I watched the right one. So I didn't accidentally watch the bootleg cut, did I? I don't think so. But I think that it's just parts that I had forgotten about. So there was a part at the end of the Tiny Dancer singing on the bus scene when William says, I need to go home. And then Penny Lane, who's sitting next to him, she does this to him. She goes, in a very, very hippie type way, does that like right in his face. And she goes, you are home. That hit me on so many levels. So my personal experience, obviously I haven't ridden in a tour bus with a band, I have ridden in my own bus or my own VW bus or my own van or my own car, traveling either on tour, following Fish around, or just traveling to another place to see a band. Or just being on the road in general and like, hey, there's a band I like playing in this city that we're passing through. Let's go see them. And I've had that experience, and it's, to me, it's a highlight of my life. Those are some of the best memories that I've had, is those types of experiences. So for her to say, "You are home," that's how I feel. That is home to me. Not that I don't also have my home, but more so in that that's a place that I feel that I really belong. That's a place I feel I thrive and I'm happy. And I think that line there, and especially the way she said it, really conveys it. That's what it is for her. And that is despite the fact that there's fucked up shit happening. And I think in her case, more fucked up shit than she was willing to admit, the way that she was being treated. But it's like none of that kind of matters, because music is your home. Traveling to see music, being on the road, spontaneous song, connecting with other people through music, that's home. So that was a really powerful scene for me. And that's not to downplay the ugliness and the negativity that goes with the rock and roll scene, and the way that she was being treated in particular. But you can't also ignore the feeling of belonging, the feeling of being home and connecting with other people through songs is just so powerful, and it just really touches my heart in a very profound way that is hard to put into words. So I had forgotten about that part. So when I saw it, I was like, my heart hurts. So there is that. Now, as far as some of the humorous scenes that I had forgotten, I've forgotten a lot of the details of the Russell going to the party scene. I did remember he went and ate a lot of acid and ended up on the roof and jumping into the pool. But I'd forgotten some of like the perfect comic timing with some of that. So, and how that really relates to his character, because this was a guy who just wasn't fulfilled with rock and roll life. He was looking for something more. And he goes to this party with this regular old kids, teenage long-haired kids from, I think they were in Topeka. And he just goes and hangs out with them. And he on this one point gets on a rampage about, you guys are real. Like, you're real, and you're real, and this is just real. And he starts flicking the lights on and off. This is real. And he goes off on this thing, and everybody just kind of stares at him. And there's this pause, this perfect pause. And the kid who lives in the house, like this long-haired, nerdy kid or whatever, the kid who lives in the house goes, "You want to see me feed a mouse to my snake?" And Russell's like, "Yes!" And it's just, oh, good. So good. And I had forgotten about that scene, but I remembered it once I saw it. I was like, so good. And then a little bit later, he starts doing a bunch of acid. Like, they give him this cup that has LSD, liquid LSD in it, and he, like, chugs it. I'm like, oh, my God. And then you see William on the phone with, I assume, the manager dude, like the guy with the British accent. I think that's who he was talking to. It's like, yeah, I just took some more acid. Wait, how do I know when it's kicking in? And then immediately it cuts to Russell on the roof going, "I am the golden god!" It was so good. The timing was so good. Perfect cut, perfect edit, perfect timing. It was so hilarious. And that, of course, leads him into the bus scene a little bit later, but so good. Now, for the airplane scene, I did remember, the comic scene with the drummer, but there's actually a level of seriousness to it. And there is something about that scene that I had forgotten about that really hit me a different way this time. Okay, so in that airplane scene, they're all kind of like yelling at each other and having it out. And William's piece here is extremely important. And I don't know if I really appreciated how important it was, because he points out to them just how fucked up their behavior toward Penny Lane has been. And someone should have pointed it out to them. And he points out to them, because just a few minutes earlier they were talking about, oh yeah, we went and we hung out with Bob Dylan. Oh, you should have been there. While William was off basically saving Penny Lane's life as she overdosed on Quaaludes. And he shouts at them, hey, you're calling her just a groupie? You just neglect her and throw her away and don't give a shit about you? You say you care about the fans and she's your number one fan? You know she almost died while you were hanging out with Bob Dylan? And to look at the looks on the faces of, they flashed to both Jeff and to Russell, and they're like, oh, fuck. And that was really important because the treatment of the female lead and how she's was treated like complete trash, even if she herself didn't seem to be aware of it for a lot of the film. That needed to be pointed out, and those particular individuals needed to feel that impact. So that was a very powerful scene that I don't know that I really picked up on as much when I first saw it. And I think a lot of it has to do, and I want to talk about kind of the difference of my perception of being able to more see things from a woman's perspective. I forgot to mention this in part 2. I was going to mention this, but when I first saw it, I very, very much related to William as this kind of nerdy teenage boy who liked the pretty girls, but the pretty girls preferred the sexier bad boys to him, and that was very much an experience that I would have had as a young man back when I was in my teen and teenage years and early 20s. So I very, very much related to William very strongly, and I still do, just because I still have those memories. Those memories have not gone away. But I wasn't able to see things from Penny's perspective at the time, and I am now, and not just because I transitioned. That's important for me to tell you, because I, over time, even still living as a male, began to learn to listen, to try to see things from other people's perspective. So that includes people of color, and that includes women when I was still identifying as male and living my life as male. I evolved and learned to listen to their experience. And it's not the same as actually experiencing it, but I was able to listen. And then since I've transitioned, I do have the experience over the last year and a half of being viewed as female, being treated more as a woman, and I do have a little bit of that experience, but it's not the same as a cis woman who has lived that for her entire life. I've lived it for a year and a half. But the other thing that I do have is I get more access into the female experience, just because I feel that women will share things with me more now relating to me as a woman than they would have as a man, because they would just assume I wouldn't understand. And so I feel like I've gotten more so on a deeper level. But it's important to say that you don't have to transition in order to have empathy for women. I want all cis hetero males to also work on that and learn to try to see things from a woman's perspective and see that they will experience things that you will not. And that was something that I was just working on even before I transitioned. Definitely getting to experience, getting a little bit of taste of the feminine perspective has helped me, but even before that I was. So it completely changes my perspective on this film, especially the ending. So the ending scene, or towards the end, Russell is talking to Penny Lane on the phone, and he is wanting to go over, he's to her house and get back together with her again and apologize. And as I was watching this scene, I actually for a hot second forgot about what happened. I was like, wait, how does this end? What happens? And I was thinking, oh my God, if she lets him go back over there, then I'm going to have to change my whole outlook on this film, because that would be the most terrible ending ever. But then she says, oh, let me give you my address. And then as soon as she said that, I was like, oh, Oh, right. I do remember what happens now. She gives him William's address. Okay. That's good. That's good because that would have been awful if after all of that, after him treating her like yesterday's garbage, like treating her like a piece of shit, selling her, as William said, for $50 and a case of beer in a poker game, after all of that, and being, not caring when she's like almost dying and not even being there, for her to go back to him would have been atrocious. And I don't know that I necessarily would have thought much of it at the time. Had it ended that way, I probably would have thought of it at that time as, oh, this is a normal Hollywood ending, because a lot of fucking movies do that. Especially movies where there's a male hero and saves the day, and, the woman just has to forgive how much of a dick he was and how much he treated her like garbage because he's a hero and he saved the day at the end of the movie. And quite frankly, Iron Man did that with Tony Stark and Pepper, if I'm being quite honest. There's tons and tons of movies that have done that. And that's what makes this movie stand apart, is that they did not go in that direction. They do not have Russell end up with Penny Lane, nor do they even have William end up with Penny Lane. And I'm pretty sure at the time, as an age 26 male, I probably wanted William to get Penny Lane because I probably would have related to William and wanting that to happen. But now I see that it is best that she goes with none of them, and she does her thing, the thing that she's been talking about all throughout this movie, to make her happy, to live her own life the way she wants to without having to rely on a man, is to go to Morocco. So that's the perfect ending for her. Then we have that ending with Russell and William. And I think I appreciated this in a way that I never had before. Because, well, first of all, you get the closure of Russell finally sitting down with William and giving him that interview he's been avoiding all the film, and that's nice. And I did catch that the first time. But this time, I connected to it on a deeper level. Because here are two characters who both share this deep love of music and how it touches their soul the way it does for me. Coming from it from two completely different walks of life, William being a 15-year-old nerdy writer, and Russell being a rock and roll star in his 20s or whatever, and doing drugs and all that sort of stuff. But they both had this common love of music, and yet they were never able to connect to each other with this very obvious way that they should connect to each other all throughout the movie, because of all the other bullshit coming from both of them. They were both having some of their own bullshit, and it prevented them from connecting in this very simple and obvious way that they should have been able to connect with each other on. So when Russell finally grants him that interview, William asks him, "So Russell, tell me just what it is you love about music." And Russell says, "Well, first of all, everything." Oh, my heart hurts. Oh, so beautiful. Not just because it conveys that absolute joy of music and how nothing else matters, but also that these two characters, these two men, not gay, not heterosexual couple, there's no romantic thing. You don't have to have that. These are two human beings connecting through music, something that they should have been able to do all along, and the conclusion of this film has them finally able to connect in that way, and it's just simple, it's just perfect. This is the absolute perfect ending. And I don't know that I would have appreciated how perfect this ending was back in the year 2000 when I was 26. And as I said, I don't know that I would have minded that much if it had ended with Russell or William getting Penny Lane. I think I would have liked William to get Penny Lane in the end. But this was such the perfect ending. I think it is safe to say this is the first Nostalgia Lane film that I've done where I have gained a greater appreciation for the film than I had before. I can't say that for any other film that I have reviewed. Now, with that said, let us go ahead and wrap this thing up finally with my rating out of 10. Okay, now let me give my rating out of 10. So 1 would be the lowest possible score, and 10 would be the highest possible score that I could give a film. And for Almost Famous from the year 2000, the rating out of 10 that I'm going to give is a 10, an absolute 10. This is only the second Nostalgia Lane film that I have done in which I have given out of 10. The first being way back when I did the very first Nostalgia Lane video for Back to the Future. And I'm going to say that this is a stronger 10 than Back to the Future, because Back to the Future was like, I watched it, I saw a lot of flaws, but I didn't care about the flaws because of the nostalgia that is ingrained in me and how much that film was meant to me throughout my life. So I gave it a 10 despite I recognize that it does have some flaws. Whereas this, I didn't see any flaws. I actually appreciated it on a whole new level. I actually like it more than I saw it when I saw it back then. And I would have given it a 10 back then. So if I could give it an 11 or 12 or 20, I would. But 10 is the highest. So this is going to be a strong 10. And I'm going to declare that even though this is the same as Back to the Future, that this is my highest rated Nostalgia Lane film. And you know what? I've been thinking about this because there's this question that I've always struggled with, and that is, what is your favorite all-time movie? And I'm envious of my brother because he has an easy answer to that, and it's been the same answer for 25 years. I won't say what that is because this is not his channel. He can tell you. And if you watch his channel, Enchantment of Eternity, you know what it is. But he's had the same answer for 25 years without a second thought. And I struggle with it. Like, what am I going to say? Empire Strikes Back, Return of the King. It's one of those genre films. I don't know. It seems kind of trite. Is that really where my passion is? Is that really where my heart is? So I don't really have a real answer, and I still don't. However, if somebody happened to ask me that question tomorrow, Almost Famous is a legitimate answer for me. As legitimate as anything else that I could say to answer that. What is my favorite film of all time? Now, in a second, I'm going to talk about what I'm covering next month. And that could also potentially be a legitimate answer for me, depending on what I think of it after my rewatch. But Almost Famous, definitely a legitimate answer to the question, what is my favorite film of all time? And a strong 10 out of 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. I'm so happy that I watched this movie again. Okay, so that wraps up this month's edition of Nostalgia Lane. Next month, I will be continuing my mission to avoid the 1980s, although I'll be getting a little bit close. I'm going to review a film from 1994, although for me, it's from 1996, because in 1996 and 97 is when I watched the living fuck out of this movie. I don't even know if I saw it in 94, but I watched the living fuck out of this movie in 1996, and that film is Shawshank Redemption, starring, of course, Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. And actually, if you had asked me in 1996 what my favorite movie of all time was, I definitely would have said Shawshank Redemption, but it's been a while since I watched it. And honestly don't know that at age, 47, almost 48, watching the film, if I still would answer that as being one of my favorite films of all time. But we will find out, because I'll watch it and then I'll let you know if I would still put it up in that category. But I definitely would have at the time. I watched it so much in 1996 and 97. So Shawshank Redemption will be the film that I will revisit for next month, Nostalgia Lane. Thank you so much for joining me for Nostalgia Lane. I realize this is a little bit longer than the usual Nostalgia Lane, but I just had so much to say. I honestly could have done like a scene-by-scene breakdown like I did for Star Trek 4 recently. I could talk about this movie for an hour or more easily, so just be thankful that I cut back. Anyways, please subscribe if you have not already. Check out all my Nostalgia Lane videos. Check out all my Star Trek, Star Wars content. Check out my transition-related videos. And I will see you all very soon. Goodbye, everybody. Out the instigator, you know there's something in the air. We've got to get together sooner or later. You know the revolution's here.